Something happened in one of the most strategically vital stretches of water on Earth, and most people have absolutely no idea what it actually means. Not just for the Middle East, not just for oil markets, for the entire architecture of modern warfare, for the balance of power that has quietly governed this region for 4 decades. You are watching Nexa World Brief. And what I'm about to walk you through is not another round of talking heads recycling the same surface-level analysis you have already seen 100 times. This is the story underneath the story. The shift that military strategists are quietly calling a threshold moment. The kind of development that does not just change a battle, it changes the rules of every battle that comes after it. Stay with me, because by the time this is over, you will understand something that the headlines have almost entirely missed. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow corridor of water sitting between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, roughly 33 kilometers across at its tightest point. Through that sliver of ocean moves somewhere between 20 and 21% of the world's entire oil supply, every single day. Tankers carrying crude from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, the UAE, and Qatar all funnel through this one geographic bottleneck before reaching the rest of the world. Europe depends on it. Asia depends on it. Japan imports nearly 90% of its oil through this channel. South Korea, India, China, all of them. If that passage closes or even slows significantly, the ripple effect on global energy prices is not measured in percentage points. It is measured in economic shockwaves. Iran has known this for decades. They built their entire regional deterrence strategy around one simple threat, that if pushed hard enough, they could reach out and strangle the world's energy supply with their geography alone. That was the doctrine. That was the leverage. And for a long time, it worked. But here is where the story gets complicated. Here is where the gap between the official narrative and the hidden reality begins to open up. Because what just unfolded in the Strait was not simply a military confrontation between the United States and Iran. It was the first true operational test of a weapons technology that theoretically dismantles the economic logic behind Iran's entire deterrence model. And the results were not what either side fully expected. Iran threw its most sophisticated asymmetric playbook at 3 American destroyers. Drone swarms, high-speed attack boats, cruise and ballistic missiles fired from inland positions. A coordinated multi-vector assault designed to overwhelm layered defenses by sheer volume and cost differential. The theory was sound, at least on paper. Flood the sky and the sea with enough cheap threats simultaneously, and eventually the defender runs out of expensive interceptors before the attacker runs out of cheap weapons. It is the logic of attrition. It is the logic that shaped proxy conflicts across this region for years. And then something remarkable happened. Something that rewrote that logic in a matter of hours. American warships activated directed energy systems. Solid-state lasers, not experimental prototypes being tested in a controlled range somewhere in the Nevada desert. Not technology scheduled for future deployment. Operational systems aboard active U.S. Navy vessels in a live combat environment against real incoming threats. The physics of what these systems do is almost disorienting when you sit with it. A concentrated beam of energy, invisible to the naked eye, traveling at the speed of light, locks onto a moving airborne target and delivers sustained thermal damage to its structure and electronics. No projectile, no explosion, no reload cycle. The cost per engagement is measured not in dollars per missile, but in the electrical output of a ship's own power plant for a matter of seconds. We are talking about a marginal cost that is effectively negligible compared to the tens of thousands of dollars each attacking drone represents, and the millions each defensive missile would have previously consumed. That economic inversion is not a footnote. It is the entire story. Think about what Iran's drone strategy was actually built to do. It was not designed to win a conventional air battle. It was designed to create an unsustainable cost ratio, to make the act of defending more expensive than the act of attacking, until American commanders faced an ammunition supply problem that commanders in Tehran hoped would eventually translate into a political problem in Washington. That calculation requires the defensive side to burn expensive interceptors to kill cheap weapons. The moment that assumption breaks down, the entire strategic architecture it supports begins to fracture. And that fracture is not theoretical anymore. It happened. Drones that cost tens of thousands of dollars were neutralized by systems drawing power from the ship's own generators. The economic logic that underpinned 4 decades of asymmetric naval pressure in the Persian Gulf was invalidated in a single operational engagement. Before a strategy collapses, there is always a phase where it appears to still be working. The drone swarms launched, They were numerous. They were coordinated. They created genuine tactical pressure. But pressure without penetration is not deterrence. It is demonstration. And what was demonstrated was not Iranian capability. It was the precise boundary of Iranian capability and where American technology now stands in relation to it. What happened at sea level during the same engagement tells a different kind of story. Iran's high-speed boat doctrine has always been the more visceral dimension of its Hormuz strategy. Small, fast, heavily armed patrol craft swarming around larger vessels, using speed and numbers to create confusion and extract political leverage. It worked against commercial shipping. It worked as a harassment tool during tense standoffs. But against Apache attack helicopters operating in a coordinated naval environment, the physics were brutally unfavorable. Helicopters designed to kill armored ground vehicles, some of the most heavily protected machines ever built for land warfare, found that lightly constructed fast patrol boats offered almost no meaningful resistance. The standoff engagement range of helicopter-launched precision munitions meant that Iranian boats were being struck before they could close into any position of tactical relevance. The doctrine of aggressive proximity, of getting close enough to be politically dangerous, never materialized. Distance became a death sentence, not a protective buffer. Dozens of vessels were lost before the engagement's surface phase concluded. The water around the American formation told a story that no official statement needed to narrate. But here is where the analysis diverges sharply from what most coverage is willing to say out loud. The Iranian attack failed. Completely. Unambiguously. But a failed attack is not the same thing as a resolved conflict. And the strategic situation that produced the attack has not been dissolved by the attack's failure. Iran is still Iran. The Strait is still the Strait. The geography has not moved. And that geography, as a source of structural power, is not negated by a single catastrophic military defeat. What has shifted is something more subtle and potentially more consequential. It is the credibility of Iran's threat. And credibility, once damaged, degrades the entire deterrence architecture that surrounds it. Proxies who were told that the swarm doctrine was unstoppable watched it get stopped. Gulf neighbors who feared that any confrontation with Tehran meant energy chaos observed markets that absorbed the confrontation with surprising stability. The fear premium, the invisible tax that Iranian strategic pressure collected from global energy prices for decades, took a measurable hit. The lever still exists, but confidence in the lever has been shaken in ways that will take years to rebuild, if they can be rebuilt at all. The American counterstrike that followed the failed assault adds another dimension entirely. F-35 stealth aircraft struck command infrastructure along Iran's northern Hormuz coastline with a precision that speaks less to the events of that single night and more to the depth of intelligence preparation that preceded it. Target packages this specific, this operationally coherent, do not get assembled in the hours after an attack. They exist in advance. They are maintained, updated, and held in readiness precisely for the moment when authorization is granted. The strikes on radar installations, command nodes, logistical staging areas, and drone forward bases were not improvised retaliation. They were the execution of plans that had been sitting in a drawer, waiting. What that tells you about American intelligence penetration of Iranian military infrastructure in the Strait region is something no official briefing will ever fully articulate. But the operational result is visible. Multiple facilities that served as the eyes and nervous system of Iran's Hormuz denial capability are degraded. The IRGC is now managing a regional military posture with significantly reduced situational awareness in a theater where situational awareness is existentially important. Operating half-blind in waters you claim to own is a condition of profound strategic vulnerability. The regional response deserves more attention than it typically receives in Western coverage. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have not been passive observers of this confrontation. For years, both countries have invested heavily in overland pipeline infrastructure designed to reduce their own exposure to Hormuz disruption, not because they expected this specific crisis, but because geography as leverage works against everyone in its vicinity, not just its intended targets. The Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline, running from the UAE's interior oil fields to a terminal on the Gulf of Oman, was built specifically to allow a portion of UAE exports to bypass the strait entirely. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline serves a similar function, moving crude to Red Sea terminals accessible to global markets without transiting Hormuz at all. These systems are not at full capacity. They cannot replace the strait entirely. but they represent a parallel infrastructure reality that quietly constrains the maximum damage any Iranian disruption can now inflict. Energy markets understood this during the crisis. The catastrophic supply shock that Iran's doctrine promised never materialized at the scale the IRGC counted on. And that mismatch between threat and consequence erodes leverage in ways that are structural and difficult to reverse. China's position in all of this is one of the most underreported dimensions of the entire situation. China is the largest single customer of Persian Gulf crude. Its economic stability is deeply entangled with uninterrupted flow through the Strait of Hormuz. Beijing has historically used its relationship with Tehran as a counterbalance to American regional influence, providing diplomatic cover, economic engagement, and political support in international forums. But China's fundamental interest in the strait is stability, not Iranian strategic success. A closed or severely disrupted Hormuz is an economic catastrophe for Beijing. Chinese energy planners have watched this confrontation with a calculation that is almost certainly more complex than any public statement from Beijing will reveal. They need the oil. They need the passage. They have interests in Iran, and they are watching American-directed energy systems destroy Iranian drones in real operational conditions, producing data points about future battlefield dynamics that every major military power on the planet is now processing with intense focus. This is the silent war of systems running parallel to the visible engagement. Every government watching this confrontation is revising its assumptions about the economics of asymmetric warfare, the viability of drone swarm doctrine, and the speed at which advanced directed energy capability is transitioning from concept to operational reality. There is a temptation, when examining a situation like this one, to conclude that American technological superiority has simply resolved the question of Hormuz, that the strait's strategic significance has been neutralized, that Iran's leverage is gone. That conclusion is premature and potentially dangerous. Geography does not disappear. The strait remains a choke point. Iran's remaining military infrastructure, degraded but not destroyed, continues to exist along its coastline. The political pressures inside the Islamic Republic that produce confrontational behavior, factional competition, economic desperation, the need to demonstrate capability to domestic audiences and regional proxies, those pressures have not been addressed by a single military engagement, however decisive. In some ways, a humiliating defeat creates more internal pressure for escalation, not less. Hardliners within the Revolutionary Guard do not read technological defeat as a reason to moderate. They read it as evidence of an existential threat requiring more aggressive response, not less. The moderates and pragmatists inside the system are fighting a different battle, one for the political direction of the regime itself. And that internal contest is not settled by what happened in the strait. The most dangerous phase of any confrontation is not the peak of violence. It is the period immediately after, when one side has suffered a catastrophic tactical defeat but has not yet processed its strategic implications. When domestic political dynamics are creating pressure to demonstrate resilience regardless of cost. When military commanders are searching for an action that can restore credibility without triggering the full weight of a response they now know they cannot absorb. That is the phase the Strait of Hormuz is entering right now. The question is not whether Iran's doctrine has failed. It clearly has. The question is what Iran does with a failed doctrine, a damaged infrastructure, a watching audience of proxies, and an internal political environment that punishes restraint and rewards confrontation. That question has no comfortable answer. It has no clear trajectory. And the uncertainty itself is consequential, not just for oil prices or shipping insurance premiums, but for the broader architecture of deterrence across a region where miscalculation has historically been the most common cause of wars nobody actually wanted. What is emerging from this moment is something that operates on a level deeper than any single engagement. Infrastructure is becoming more powerful than military force. The pipelines that bypass the strait, the directed energy systems that invert the cost logic of drone warfare, the intelligence networks that pre-position target packages for facilities that haven't yet been struck, these are the instruments of a competition that will outlast any particular confrontation. Geography is being reshaped not through conquest, but through the patient construction of alternatives. The strait remains a choke point, but a choke point loses its leverage when enough of the flow it commands has been redirected, and when the cost of threatening that flow has become structurally prohibitive. We are watching the early stages of that permanent shift in real time. And what makes it so significant is that most of the people it affects most directly do not yet fully understand what has changed. So where does this leave us? Iran still has missiles. It still has drones. It still has a coast that borders one of the most important waterways in the world. The IRGC still has commanders who believe that aggression is the only language that preserves the revolutionary project they have given their lives to. American technological superiority has been demonstrated with a clarity that could not have been scripted. But demonstrated superiority does not automatically produce rational adversary behavior. Sometimes it produces desperation. Sometimes desperation produces decisions that neither side would have chosen in a calmer moment. The Strait of Hormuz has always been a place where the gap between controlled pressure and uncontrolled escalation is measured in very small margins. That gap has not widened. If anything, the events of this confrontation may have narrowed it. And so the question that remains, the one that does not have a comfortable answer, is this. When a power that has built its entire regional identity around a threat discovers that threat no longer functions the way it promised, what does it do next? And are we prepared for what that answer might look like? Leave your analysis in the comments. This conversation matters. And if you want to stay ahead of events in the world's most consequential flashpoints before they break into mainstream coverage, subscribe to Nexa World Brief right now. Because what happens next in the Strait of Hormuz will not wait for anyone to catch up.